Obviously, one of the more important elements of running for office is mobilizing resources. It does take, people power and often money to get the word out, right? People don't just know that you're running for office. It's not necessarily in the air we breathe. I think sometimes as Greens, because we're political by nature and politics clearly excites us, we're involved, we're paying attention, and we don't necessarily realize that our average neighbor is not as involved as we are and doesn't pay attention to every single thing that's going on, particularly in a time like now when there's so much other noise and news about other really important things. So we're going to talk about money and volunteers, particularly, as two of the most important resources that you will need on your campaign. Money and volunteers, that's really it. So I'm going to start with the money piece, right? You need it. I know there's a lot of Greens who really want to be, to run a no-dollar campaign, right? There's sort of this, I think, belief in the party that money is just inherently evil. We want, Greens say we want money out of politics, but I think really we want big money out of politics. We want money as, votes and influence out of politics. Not that we're going to have all money out of politics. That's just not realistic. We need to be able to, advertise. We need to be able to print literature, signage. Even in COVID times, these things matter, and those things cost money. We just talked about in the previous module all the people and human resources you need, and depending on the time that they're putting in, they might need compensation. And so you really need to, think about the fact that you're going to need materials in order to put together your campaign, and that stuff just doesn't grow on trees. And so, thank you, I remuted everyone. All right, so, you're gonna need a website, right? And while you might be able to do something on your own, and we're gonna talk about some, low cost and free options later, a professionally designed website is better, and that professionally designed typically means spending some money. And I mentioned you're gonna need advertising, you're gonna need literature, and staff, and all of those things cost money or can. And legal, you might need to do a challenge, to ballot access laws, right? Like right now we have a lot of Greens and state parties around the country that are filing lawsuits to challenge, petition requirements because of the pandemic. It's not possible for us to go door knocking or to go to farmers markets and collect signatures because of the social distancing guidelines. And so, in order to put that challenge out there, we need to hire lawyers, and that costs money for sure. And then video equipment. And I put this on particularly now because while it may not have been one of my normal campaign expenses pre-pandemic, certainly right now, it's definitely the type of thing, we're really just, everything's online. One of the other sessions that we'll have later this afternoon is video production at home, how you can do more polished and high quality, whether it's live streaming or creating videos that you then, edit and put out there. And, even if it's only a couple $100s worth of equipment to sort of have a more polished and professional look, it's a couple $100s. And so you definitely need resources, and you shouldn't be afraid of trying to raise as much money as you can in order to, achieve the goals that you want to achieve, and whether it's winning, of course, or building the party, moving an issue, building name recognition, etc. Okay, and other professional services. And that could be, as we mentioned before, treasury, it could be, public relations, all kinds of things. All right, so the thing that I always really talk about, and this is a little bit of repeat from the session that we just had, is that the candidate is really the fundraiser in chief. And so, yes, you will hopefully have a volunteer or a staff person who's in charge of fundraising. And in normal times, that might have been events like house parties, and certainly those kinds of things can be done virtually. But there's nothing that beats the candidate just making phone calls themselves and calling people directly. People love hearing from the person who is actually running for office. It's very different than hearing from a volunteer or a surrogate. And so what I say to every person, and I just said this 20 minutes ago in the previous module, is, you know, take out your cell phone and call 100 people and ask for $100. Ideally, call every single person in your cell phone. People will give you money if they know you and like you, more so than if they align with your values. And I know that sounds crazy, but you know, my father-in-law, who is a Trump voting Republican, would give me money in a heartbeat if I told him I was running for city council in Philadelphia, because he likes me. Because, you know, I mean, when we can go at it across the dinner table and we have very different opinions, but at the end of the day, you know, he's in my family and he's going to support me. And so don't assume what people will or won't do. Don't assume how much they will or won't give. You know, you're giving them the opportunity. If they want to say no, that's on them, and that's fine. But if you know, and you can't be timid about raising money or asking people for money. You know, if you're asking for their vote and you want them to take you seriously, you have to take you seriously. And that means that you belong in this race, that you are a worthy candidate, and that means that you're going to need some money in order to get your message out there. And so you need to have the confidence in your own campaign, and then that will translate through the phone and through your voice and through your emotions and your, you know, way of being into other folks, and people will give you money. I think sometimes what I see from candidates is that they don't really actually believe in themselves as candidates. They're just, oh, well, I'm just running for office to sort of like fill out the ballot and make sure there's a green name. And, you know, they're sort of running like what I would call paper campaigns. And while that there might be some strategic value in that, that's not what's going to motivate people to donate. And so having a strong vision, having a reason that the policies that the Green Party and you particularly are promoting in this moment, in this community, matters. And, you know, and then tell people what it is that you're going to do with that money. Like, I need to get 50,000 flyers printed, and that's going to cost XYZ, and that will get people motivated to donate to your campaign. You could also obviously do e-blasts to your friends and supporters, so emails. They're not nearly as effective as phone calling, and certainly one thing in this time where you probably, though not everyone, because I do know that there's still some essential workers out there, but you might have some more time on your hands to make phone calls, and people are going to be more likely to be home. That doesn't mean that they'll necessarily answer the phone if you're robocalling a cold list, but if you're calling your friends, generally speaking, they're going to answer the phone, and, you know, you can ask them for money. Friends and supporters for e-blasts, that's once you've gotten a list going. That's once you've gotten some, you know, you've had your website up and you've gotten your likes and you've gotten your signups. You could hopefully also gain access to, once you're an endorsed candidate, to Green Party lists for your local or state chapter. And, you know, that's when you're crafting messages and creating a sense of urgency and saying, now is the time to give. This is the way to get people involved as donors in your campaign. And those are usually pretty low cost ways of raising money. And then I guess, you know, the other thing that I think we're all trying to figure out and invent are virtual events. And so, you know, normally I would have talked about house parties or other types of events. You know, I think there's creative ways to still do this. You know, if people can do Zoom Seders and Zoom Easters, they can do Zoom house parties, right? And so I think, you know, we're going to do Zoom Mother's Day tomorrow. So there's ways to, you know, be together without being together, and to try to, you know, as a candidate, put yourself out there, give a small talk, answer questions, and then of course do your pitch the same way that you would have in someone's actual living room. And then of course you can also get volunteer-led phone banking going on, and that's when, you know, it's not necessarily you making the call, but your volunteers. And those volunteers are going to hopefully be using the lists of supporters that you've already cultivated from, you know, what you've already done on your campaign, by announcing, by having a website, collecting signups, Again, maybe borrowing lists from your local Green Party from candidates that have run before. And so I wouldn't necessarily have volunteers call your personal friends and contacts from your cell phone, but they should be able to, you should be able to provide them with lists of people to call. You know, even if you have to go through the route of getting, you know, like registered voters from your state or county board of election, those phone numbers aren't always the greatest because people, you know, people, I think a lot of times those lists have old landlines and it's not necessarily with the phone number that people are using now, but it's something, if you know, if that's where you've got to start. You can also pay for services to take, like if you have names and emails and you want to try to get phone numbers for those same people or vice versa, there are companies that do what's called like a phone append, and they can look up phone numbers for you. There's obviously different companies that, you know, and we can recommend some perhaps if you need that. But, you know, definitely make sure that phone banking is going on, and it can be both for fundraising and for, you know, just other types of support. All right, so I think this is where my piece ended on the fundraising. And I'm going to switch a little bit to volunteers and realize that I am winging it a bit here, but I do have a lot of experience with volunteer management in my day job as well as sort of in my Green Party life. And so I think, you know, part of the issue with trying to get volunteers, or say part of the strategy for volunteers, is people really need to be asked to do something specific. And so, well, let me just say, there's two kinds of volunteers. There's sort of general volunteers where you put the call out and say, hey, we need people to volunteer on XYZ campaign, and we have phone banking, and we have door knocking, and we have this, that, and social media. You know, those are sort of some, I think, top and, you know, fairly sort of broad-based generic types of volunteering that you might see on a campaign. So, you know, you can put out a sort of broad call, see what you get. You want to make sure that you actually follow up with every single person who offers to volunteer. And that sounds really basic, but that is something that doesn't always happen. You know, you might actually have a function on your website, especially if you're using something like Nation Builder out of the box, where there's like a sign up link, and that then gets, you know, an email gets sent to someone, so-and-so just signed up. Well, are we paying attention? Is that just sort of noise in our own inbox, or are we realizing and following up with every single person who said, I want to volunteer? And, you know, unfortunately, I think sometimes, you know, you have to go through a lot of people in order to actually get some good volunteers. It's pretty easy to just sort of sign up on a website and not necessarily really have desired to volunteer significant hours, but you won't know until you follow through. And the person who really did want to volunteer, there's nothing worse than if no one ever follows up with them. You know, they're saying, I actually want to engage with your organization and help you meet your mission. You know, that's the thing that should be the most important thing for us, is reaching out to those folks and saying, great, how? And so if you have the time and the energy and the volunteer, you know, the people power, what I would recommend is, you know, one-on-one phone calls and really, you know, talking to each person who signs up and saying, you know, what is it that you'd like to do? What are your skills and experiences? And then trying to fit them into a role that you have for your campaign. And then the opposite way of doing that is to be promoting and advertising really specific roles. So if you have some, like, we need a web manager, you know, we need a social media person, we need someone to write letters to the, op-ed letters to the editor. Like, those are very specific asks, and people also respond well to that. You know, just general calls for volunteering without kind of knowing, well, how much time is this going to take me? Do I have the skills to do it? Who do I touch base with if I don't know what I'm doing and I need more help? You know, those are the kinds of questions that make people hesitate and not necessarily sign up. And I would say the other thing is, just like, this is the same with asking for money. There's a difference between making it broadly known that you have needs and asking people specifically for something, right? Like, I know because of my role that there's dozens of candidates out there, and I pretty much assume that they all need money. Does that mean that I sit here and just write checks? No, I don't. But if a candidate calls me, and I don't care if they're in Hawaii or Kalamazoo, they don't have to be in Philly. If somebody calls me and asks me for money, I'm pretty much always going to give them something. It may not be a lot, but I will, for the most part, say yes, because they've made the effort to ask me specifically. Knowing that there's an unmet need is not usually enough motivation for me to jump in and fill it. I'm not just sitting around saying like, wow, I have so much free time on my hands. Let me find ways to fill it. But when somebody asks me, hey, Hillary, can you do X? If it's very, if it's specific and it's asked in the right way, I might consider it. And so an example would be, 2 years ago, we had, I guess it was 3 years ago now, 2017, a candidate running for judge statewide. Pennsylvania is one of those arcane states where we elect judges. And he knew that I was super busy. I was already treasurer of GPUS and 100 other hats in the party, not to mention, full-time job and 2 kids. And so he was like, Hillary, I know you don't have time, but will you do this one thing? And the one thing he asked me to do was sort of, run the bi-weekly staff meetings for his campaign. So basically every 2 weeks I got on the phone. I wasn't doing much of the work, but I was trying to check in and say like, okay, Julia, you said you would do media. What's gone on? I kept the agenda. I ran a tight call for like an hour once every 2 weeks. That was as much as I could give. And I did it because I was given a very specific thing that I could say yes or no to. And so, I encourage you to really think deeply about the volunteer needs that you have. What is it that you're trying to do? And you probably need help to do it. So, whether it's and you need maybe specific skills. Maybe you need someone who does graphic design, to make flyers, to make memes, to make graphics for social media. Maybe you need someone who knows different social media channels that you're not familiar with so that you can, not spend, loads of time trying to learn all that on your own, but instead, create the ideas and somebody else can package that content and put it up on social media. So the more specific you can make that volunteer request, I think the better you'll be in terms of finding someone. And then once you plug someone into that role, you also have to follow up and you have to manage that. And you have to give them deadlines and you have to give them the resources. So it can't just be like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you did some graphics for me at some point during this campaign? Okay, great, thanks. And then just sit back and wait for those graphics to roll in. That's generally not gonna happen. It's like, okay, you can do graphics, that's fabulous. Can you send me a couple samples of something that you've done so I can see the type of work you do? So you still wanna vet people. Just because they're not paying them doesn't mean that you have to accept everything they produce. Like, quality still matters. So you wanna give people, give them a little test run. You want to, and then once they do that, you say, okay, this is great. I would really like to put, like, this breaking news piece just happened. I want to get a meme out there that says X, can you create something? And can I get it by Wednesday? And, and if the answer is no, okay. But, the answer might be yes. And it's better than saying, please do this, and then waiting a week and twiddling your thumbs and wondering why it hasn't come in yet. And so very specifically ask, I have this need, can it be done by this date? If not, what date can it be done by? That works, that doesn't work. And then, by Wednesday, you're following up. How did it go? Well, can I see it? Do you need more resources? And so really just constant communication really is the name of the game. And just making sure that people, can tell you, at what level they can produce, right? So you might have someone who can do graphics once a month, once a week, once a day, right? And those are all very different levels of availability. And so you want to sort of ask that kind of thing up front. I'm seeing a question in the chat about the systems that people use for follow-up. And so there's a few different things. I mean, like on the high end, Nation Builder does have these pathways built in. I know we're starting to experiment with them at the national level in the party. Starlene, who is our office manager and volunteer coordinator, is starting to use that. The Hawkins campaign is using Fresh Desk. The Green Party also uses Fresh Desk. Fresh Desk is really, in my experience, like an email ticketing system where it just allows like essentially multiple people to sort of check the same inbox and to sort of make sure that like, you know, things have gotten like assigned and closed and taken care of. It really doesn't have to be that sophisticated. I mean, it can just be a spreadsheet where you keep, you know, person, like what you've asked them to do and the last time you contacted them, and maybe their contact info. And then, you know, like every day sort of look at it, or once a week, and be like, oh, you know, these are the people who I last contacted, you know, the longest time ago, let me double check. And again, you know, it can get labor intensive, which is why you want to ideally find a volunteer manager, even if they're a lead volunteer or getting a small stipend, to sort of take this on, because it can be its own, it is its own big job. And so, and it's again, this balance of what is it that you can do and you want to do, and how can I mobilize this person's existing talents and interests, versus what do I need and how do I find the people who can meet those specific needs. It's sort of a both and so, you know, so that's what I would, you know, and volunteers really can be, it's in some ways, I think it's a way to stretch your money, right? If you can get somebody to do something for free, well, great, that's, you know, that's money that you saved because you didn't need to pay for it. I guess one quick treasurer note on that, what campaigns do have to track in-kind expenses and donations. And so this would be when somebody provides your campaign something of value, instead of giving you the cash directly. So instead of me giving you $500 to rent this hall for an event, I paid the $500, or I own the hall and I'm just giving you use of it for these 2 hours. So that's like the example of an in-kind. When it comes to volunteer time, generally speaking, volunteers do not have to count their time as an in-kind donation unless it's their professional role and they normally would charge for it. So like if you're an accountant and you're giving away accounting services, that is an in-kind donation. If you're an accountant and you volunteered for 3 hours to bake brownies for a, you know, a bake sale, that is not an in-kind donation. So I just want to make that clear. And so depending on the type of volunteer you have, you know, if it is a professional service that they normally get paid for, you will have to count their time at the normal rate that they would normally bill. And if you have campaign finance limits, that might mean that you can only get so many hours worth of time from them. So just know that. Somebody is asking in the chat box about recording in-kind versus regular donations. Again, every jurisdiction is different in terms of how that is done. But in my experience, there's either a separate table where you record those donations separately, or there's like the FEC level, it's just like a checkbox where you say this particular donation is an in-kind donation versus a direct donation. All right, so we are getting to the point where it is, we have a little a bit less than 15 minutes to go in this module. And so I want to open it up. I'm going to take people off of mute and let people ask questions and also share stories.
What are my options?
If I do hear some background noise. If I have to selectively put people back on mute, I will. But feel free to put your name in the chat box if you want to ask questions. And or, you know, tell stories. And I would love to hear from people as well about times that they maybe gave money or gave donations and what motivated them to do so, because I think that's also useful for folks to hear who are going to be on the other end of that conversation.
Oh, I see.
Don't all shout at once.
Erin, how do we get more media coverage for Green Party candidates this year?
So getting media coverage, I mean, that's a totally different topic that we're actually going to have Holly talk about later in the day. But generally speaking, you know, I mean, it's hard. You know, the bottom line is you have to be doing something that is quote unquote newsworthy in order to generate what's called earned media. When you earn the media coming to you and covering you and basically getting your name in the paper or on TV for free. As opposed to advertising. And that's hard because I think, you know, what we deem to be newsworthy and what the general public and or the news media to be newsworthy are often different. But it's really, you know, that is a special thing. I'm going to sort of defer to Holly on that one. But trying to find a volunteer who has media experience, both social media and also, and it's probably different people who have experience with traditional media, is something that I think is really important and can't be overlooked because it is a skill set, it is a role, there is a way of writing press releases, and if you can find someone who's already had that experience, that can only help your campaign. I see Kelly from Pittsburgh is on stack.
How much should candidates figure in their budget on spending?
Sorry, David, you were breaking up. Did you have a follow-up question? Okay. Let's go to Kelly from Pittsburgh.
Hi. So you asked about what motivates people to donate or like share what has motivated us to donate. One thing that I do as a treasurer is in the thank you emails for online donations, I always say, your donations help us print materials, plan events. Telling them specifically what you're spending the money on helps people to know like, oh, my money's going to a good place and like it's going directly to the candidate. So I think that really helps, even if you just explain it in person or whether it's in your thank you email or whether it's on your website next to the donate button. Just being very straightforward and transparent helps show that we're trying to change the system and we're getting money out of politics. We're only getting the necessary money that we need to run this campaign.
And I think on that point, thank people again and again, right?
Yes, yeah.
You know, every person who donates to your campaign should get a thank you, whether that's an automatic thank you from through email or an actual thank you card. If they send you a check in the mail, everyone should get a thank you. You know, if you get a major gift, and you know, in the Green Party, we basically, if somebody gives us $500 or more at the national level, we try to call them. Like we try to have someone from the steering committee to do a personal outreach and say thank you for your gift. You know, and volunteers need thanking too. They need thanking throughout. You know, people need to be thanked at the beginning, like, thank you so much, Kelly, for volunteering to do this. I'm so excited. It's going to be great. And then like checking in, you know, a few weeks in and like another thank you. You know, you can do social media shout outs to your volunteers. And certainly by the end of the campaign, like a serious formal thank you. And I'm talking like a pizza party, right? I mean, hopefully by then we will be able to have pizza parties. But, you know, like you need to have a way of just recognizing, you know, again, in normal times, if I had people phone banking for 4 hours straight, like I'd be buying them pizza. And then that's a legit campaign expense, right? You know, you really got to thank people in small and big ways and make sure that they feel appreciated, because, you know, there's nothing worse than feeling taken for granted. All right, so I'm seeing some, you know, free t-shirts, you know, whatever you want, like that's the kind of stuff that you can give your volunteers. Yes, so I'm seeing chat, you know, stuff in the chat about handwritten volunteers. And there's some discussion about, you know, the amounts that you might need to, whether or not you have to report something as an in-kind. All right, so Hillary, so if someone is an accountant who is salaried at Google, who is not an independent business, who volunteers for treasurer, is that considered professional in-kind services? That's actually a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. And that might be the kind of thing that you actually have to call your state board of election, the campaign finance division, and ask. And if you're running for a US Senate, that would be the FEC. So there is a ton of stuff online, fec.gov. There's just like boatloads of regulations. I might put Travis on the spot. Travis, I don't know if you're still on the call, but I know that back in the day, we sent you to an FEC training, and you're now also an FEC level treasurer. So is that something that you happen to know the answer to? And do you need me to repeat the question?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure that you can do that. You could report it that way. You could call it an in-kind donation of services. But I also am not convinced that you would be like required to report it that way. I don't know that you would get like in trouble for not reporting the in-kind donation of services, because I mean, it's a volunteer who is, you know, volunteering their time for your campaign. So I guess that means I don't know either, but that topic definitely came up, and I think you could treat it either way. I think you could report it as a in-kind donation of services or not.
Okay, so I think the bottom line is to call your FEC analyst and just ask. And in my experience, you know, once you get them on the phone, they're pretty nice. They're usually, you know, it's not like a gotcha thing. So I think, you know, I think if you're comfortable reporting it and you're not worried that you're going to get past some sort of campaign contribution limit, you know, like if they bill $400 an hour and after like, you know, 10 hours, you're already past, you know, some level. If you're not worried about that, then go ahead and report it as an in-kind. But if you are worried about that, then definitely call your FEC analyst and just ask, because I feel, you know, like Travis, I feel like it could go either way. And other questions I might ask, like, well, this person might be salaried and working for Google now, but have they ever been an independent, you know, CPA where they sort of just put themselves out there at an hourly rate or not? You know, that type of thing. So. All right, anything else related to fundraising and volunteer generation? Any stories, any challenges that people are having? I'm particularly interested if people are having the challenge of retaining volunteers, or if it's more of an issue of just getting people to volunteer in the first place. All right, so John is saying getting volunteers. You know, I think one of the things that people have to think about, you know, is that, and this really is about, you know, the dynamism and charisma of the candidate, right? Like, is this the type of person that people get excited about and get excited to be around and to help, right? And so, you know, that's what you're trying to cultivate in yourself if you're the candidate, and or, you know, of your candidate if you're just sort of on the campaign. And you really have to, you know, you can't be the type of person that's like, well, you know, if you'd like to help me out, there's these things, you know, I don't know, I'm sure you're too busy. You know, I've seen a lot of that where you're almost sort of giving people the excuse not to participate in your campaign. Again, you know, no timid candidates, no wallflowers here, right? You have to be sold on your vision and why you are running for office, why this matters, why, even if you're not going to win and you know it and everyone around you know it, there's still some bigger, more important thing that's going to happen because of this race. Whether it's building the future base for the next run, moving the needle on some issue, getting organized, you know, all of those things can matter. And so you've got to sell it, and you've got to really be, you know, thinking about what resonates. And so, you know, and not to take a page from sort of the like corporate pollsters, but like if the spiel you're using isn't working, try a different spiel. You know, think about different ways of asking for the same thing. You know, I like what, you know, Kelly is saying, your money is making a difference about things you care about. You know, in some ways, if you feel like, you know, you're too the ego and you're not comfortable, like take you out of it. It's about the issues. It's about, you know, the thing that's going on in the community. And that will hopefully, you know, get people excited. And it's, Jay, it's not psychological tricks. You know, we're not, you know, I'm not talking about manipulating people and like, you know, sleights of hand and using different words. I'm just talking about being authentic and really trying to connect with people on a human level and asking them for their help because you need it.
Well,
So, yeah.
if I could comment on this
Yes.
to an effect, because I actually talked to a lot of people. I've never actually changed the positions that I helped a Senate candidate run on. We never changed any position. All we did was just reframe it in a way that people understood or connected with. When it comes down to it, though, this is as much of an organizing effort as it is an activist effort, because a lot of people view campaigning as an activist effort of I have solutions and I'm going to fight for these solutions and stuff like that. But it also requires you going into those communities, listening to them talk, getting involved at the local churches, getting involved at the local charities. I'm in Utah, so we actually have a lot of those. So it's a good place to actually hear and talk to people. You'd be surprised how often, like how open people are about the current situation that they're going through, and how difficult life is when you just start up a conversation. I was on a train going to work downtown, and I was talking to this one person, and I asked them, I randomly started talking to people, going and ask them, what would it be like if you made double your current wage? Because there was because we were at the time in which there was like a minimum wage increase and people were fighting for 15. But at the same point,
You okay, Hannah?
Utah
Can I do anything?
are making $15 an hour on average, and that's a sort of living wage. But you have like a construction person making $15 an hour, which is not great. If you've ever worked construction, it's normally like double that. And so I asked the guy who was in orange jacket, what would it be like if you made more money? And that's the thing, is if you start asking these questions, people start opening up. It's like, oh, well, if I had double the money, I'd be able to save for a job. I'd be able to, or not for a job, for my own business. I'm trying to start my own business and stuff like that. And that's the thing. You have to actually go into what is it that actually people are currently going through, because even with these like abstracts, like Medicare for all, which we're all suffering from a healthcare system, someone's issue might just be the fact they can't afford their bills at that particular moment, and don't have a medical issue, or that they suffer from gun violence and don't really care about their job because it's fine right now. Their job is fine, but their cousin got shot on the street. And so, and for me, that's actually something I specialize on. I actually am a Democratic Party insider, and so I actually also specialized on counter-Democratic Party and Republican Party messaging. I actually am a policy advisor to a person who ran for Senate and stuff like that. I'm in Utah, and I deal with a lot of, and this is the thing, is I deal with a lot of more conservative people.
Sure.
But and in terms of like, they're more Teddy Roosevelt type of conservative. So we're not, this state is very interesting to me. I think it's a very interesting state. And and with our policies on my end, I changed it from like gun control to just zero gun fatalities, and slight changes like that
So
speak
thank you,
more to
William.
people.
Thank you. Sorry. I mean, I just want to work sort of overtime, so I just want to be sensitive to that. But I think you make a great point. It's not about, it's not about changing policies or changing what you believe. It's about just reframing. And I like the way that you really talked about connecting with people personally. Like, imagine that like if there was universal basic income, or if we had true universal health care, how would your life be different? And getting people to really think about the impact of our policies on their lives, and then translating that motivation into either being a volunteer or being a donor. So thank you again for that information. All right, so we're a little over time. I'm going to switch to the next module, and again, that was supposed to be Erin Fox, so I think it's going to be myself and perhaps Holly jumping in here to kind of to